Ratchet & Clank is PlayStation's most prolific franchise, if you include Sony's annual baseball games, which technically precede the PlayStation itself. From 2002 to 2021, the duo amassed 17 different games across every PlayStation platform, from the PS2 to the PS5 and certainly beyond, from the PSP to Sony's short-lived PlayStation Mobile initiative of games for smartphones. That does mean the two Last of Us games are close to catching up, give it a couple more years, but one of those 17 Ratchet games never really saw the light of day. Until today. For nearly 2 decades, it's been assumed that 2006's cancelled Java phone title Ratchet & Clank Clone Home was lost media, maybe a game that wasn't even in development long enough to have a playable build to begin with. I'm incredibly proud to be the one that gets to share that not only did this strange nugget of Ratchet history in fact exist, some very dedicated fans found it after years of searching, and that, to toot my own horn just this one time, I was the one that provided the key lead they hunted down for the last 6 years that finally hit pay dirt. This has been a very hushed community effort since 2023 from these folks, members of the modding and speedrun community, and to a much lesser extent, myself, to safely break the phone's encryption and dump the game, likely the only surviving device that had Ratchet & Clank Clone Home, a 2004-era phone that, at any point during this, was liable to completely die and lose everything. Clone Home is real. It's a finished game, or mostly finished if a bit unpolished, and the new studio that came on to make this second Java Ratchet game actually made it quite a bit better than its predecessor made by a completely different company. And that means it's up there as one of the better J2ME games ever produced. And technically, it's the first Ratchet game where you play as 2 different Lombaxes. Rift apart, eat your heart out. I've played this weird, unhinged sequel to Ratchet Deadlocked. A few speedrunners have already been cracking it open to get ready for the speedrun community to go nuts with it, and other folks in this community have archived this piece of lost media so that it can be preserved for years to come, provided Sony doesn't see any reason to remove the archives and their mirrors, as is their right to do. Based on some of the on-background chats I've had though, not that this is representative of the entire company, I've heard a bit of, holy shit, they found it? So I think there will probably be employees using the archive links below too to preserve this bit of history for themselves. This is the story of the lost and now found RNC game. This is Ratchet & Clank Clone Home. Back in 2019, I covered the story of Ratchet & Clank's 2005 Java phone game, titled Going Mobile, one of a handful of Java or J2ME games that were published by Sony from 2003 to about 2008. It was a who's who of landmark video game franchises they brought to Java phones, starting with Q*bert and the Stuart Little 2 movie tie-in game, ending with a turn-based James Bond fighting game, and including only a couple noteworthy games like God of War Betrayal, RNC Going Mobile, and Snoop Dogg Punch-Out! It was a strange time. Going Mobile was well received. We obviously don't have sales data, but we can safely assume it sold at least 4 copies, and it even garnered end-of-year awards from some of the few outlets that had covered mobile games like this at the time. It did well enough that Sony greenlit a sequel, Ratchet & Clank Clone Home, which was revealed in June 2006 and slated for later that year before quietly being cancelled. Well, sort of. There's a very specific rumor that I've been privy to since all the way back on the old Insomniac forum days, which has a strong chance of being a Mandela effect situation, but due to the source was plausible enough to give some hope. One of the longtime Insomniac community moderators had shared back in the early 2010s, perhaps even a bit earlier, that Clone Home was sent to cell phone providers and accidentally got released by an even smaller number of those networks for the briefest of periods. Clone Home would have come out back when you would text a keyword to a 5-digit cell phone number to buy games, or connect your phone to your carrier's specific WAP, no relation, and have the charge sent to your monthly phone bill. So it was entirely believable that this tiny game that didn't matter in the grand scheme could have accidentally slipped through the cracks, gotten sent along by some Sony Pictures Mobile employee, or a contractor that didn't know better perhaps, and then uploaded to the Singular or Sprint storefront by one of their employees by mistake before anybody caught wind. Mind you, this rumor started in the early to mid PS3 era, where a bunch of Insomniac employees just hung out on these forums. This was somebody that they knew for years, that they trusted for years as a moderator, I think even to this day, and was in this group of community ambassadors that Insomniac has actually flown out to the studio for special previews before, as if they were press. So this was someone with some merit and credibility. I was there when those conversations happened. I vaguely recall actual employees chiming in and lending this mod even more credibility, and even though it stretches into Mew under the truck territory when you hear somebody say, "I was in the middle of downloading it when it got pulled," this was at least an unlikely glimmer of hope. Whether this community mod was misremembering and maybe actually saw Going Mobile on the store, or if just the listing had gone up as scheduled in late 2006 with a dummy placeholder file, or whether this person just maybe wanted to have a hee-haw and lie on the internet, who would do such a thing? Whatever the case, this didn't matter because it led to this small belief amongst myself and others that Clone Home could have in fact been a playable video game. Regardless, for almost 20 years, it was assumed to be lost media, long enough that the fans that were actually able to find it are only slightly older than the game itself. For 2 decades, all we had were a few blurry screenshots provided to IGN, and even fewer people that really wanted to find this niche-ass game that's turned into something of a holy grail for probably 14 people. So that's the background. When I covered the first Ratchet Java game, Going Mobile, in 2019, although this was well before my Ratchet series retrospective and my current production style, I did make it a point, as I always have, to dig into that game's development details, and I was able to get in touch with one of Going Mobile's developers, a former employee at the mobile game studio fittingly named Handheld Games, who chatted with me at the request of anonymity. Total sidebar, searching for a company with the name Handheld Games was a complete pain in the ass, and that was before search engines started openly trying to make their search results worse, especially deprioritizing older links and tossing a good chunk of that earlier internet into complete darkness. Anyway, up until this point in 2019, it was assumed that Clone Home was probably slated to be produced by Handheld Games. After all, why wouldn't it be? The ex-employee I'd spoken to had revealed to me, though, that Handheld never had a hand in that game whatsoever. So at the end of that video, I threw out a theory that I had already started looking into myself, which was also a bit of a toss to the community or anybody that might have a connection. Handheld Games had produced all 3 of Sony's 2005 Java games, but the final few from 2007 to 2008, when Sony gave up on the platform, focusing instead on things like the new iOS App Store and making it easy to port those games to the PSP's new downloadable Minis sublabel, the final run of Java games that Sony had published then were all made by a studio named JavaGround. It was my theory that since Handheld wasn't responsible, it was possible or even likely that JavaGround was the team that worked on Clone Home before later making God of War Betrayal, Spider-Man Bejeweled, a few James Bond titles, and even some of Sony's first published iOS games like Jeopardy! One of Going Mobile's designers later added crucial context to this in the comments of that Going Mobile video, noting that there were some internal issues with Sony offering less and less money for each subsequent project, while also, of course, wanting them churned out faster and faster. Suddenly, it would make sense that they turned to one of the most prolific Java developers at that time and work with a lower bidder. This was the thread that I tugged on every so often for 3 years, and the same thread that a few members of the community were working on for probably about the same before they reached out to me in 2023. We reconnected and we tried to combine our efforts. Every bit of credit for Clone Home's discovery from this point on goes to 2 folks in particular, so if you don't write in the comments thanking SGOC and Emily, you're not a good person. Extra points if you write SGOC's full handle out, Super Gamer Omega Clank, because their name tickles me every time. It's such a good name. And to be clear, there are others involved too that helped out, some that prefer to keep anonymous, but it's these 2 that led the charge and that I think deserve their flowers for this. I helped out where I could, lending a bit of credibility when they hit dead ends with any leads that might have been hesitant to chat with a couple college kids who might be more convinced talking to somebody they might see as the Ratchet guy that the IP holder actually works with and that has a track record of keeping sources secure, or in the case of some folks that may have been on and off or a bit ghosty with their responses when I happened to come in from a different angle. Even then, I don't think I really helped all that much. They got the results themselves. By the time I had joined in their efforts, these 2 had already done the exact kind of work I would have if I had had the time to get that far myself on that project, contacting anybody who might be connected to that game, the company pulling info, level maps, and deeper leads to continue following up on. It was an impressive effort, and I'm going to paraphrase what one of them said here because God, if it isn't true, who else has time to look for Clone Home besides college kids? By the time they were able to find a phone with the game files encrypted on it, likely the only phone left with the game on it, before I could even suggest this, the group contacted friend of the channel Boardplate, the mind behind the original RNC randomizer I covered a couple years back, and others within the modding community as well to help figure out a safe dumping and decryption strategy, since there might only be one shot at this. Anything I would have done or suggested, they were already on top of, so as a proud Ratchet dad, this was where my involvement mostly ended until last week when they contacted me and showed me the result. It took years of elbow grease, a decent amount of money on buying very specific 20-year-old models of duplicate phone and equipment to test the modding software, which when I found out they were spending money on this, I went ahead and paid them back because I've been college broke before. I couldn't in good conscience let them eat that or try to crowdfund it or something. That's what gross YouTubers are for. Check out my Patreon. For legal purposes, that part might all be a joke, but the point is, 6 years later, Clone Home is archived and available. Through a mutual friend, I reached out to the folks at the Video Game History Foundation for best practices on safely and legally preserving the files now that they exist in a readable form. I've reached out to Sony and Insomniac contacts, who naturally aren't going to comment on the record about this, but some of whom privately shared that they're excited by this news, and as I mentioned earlier, some of the other anonymous folks involved with this preservation effort have uploaded a copy to archive.org and other mirrors. At the time of publish, I'm including a link to that preservation effort that other folks have uploaded so that you can see that it's there. It's not my upload, that file could come down at any time if Sony so requested, and if I get an official request asking me to remove the link itself, I'm going to because the people at Sony are very nice to me and I like not being sued. I don't anticipate that's going to be the case. Historically, they've been fairly lax on this sort of preservation for games they straight up don't or can't sell. Going Mobile's been archived for 20 years on hundreds of sites, and they don't act on that one, for example, just the games they still physically sell, but their leadership and policies could change at any time. So now that you know the story of how this multi-year effort came to be and came to get results, that lets me get into the meat of the game itself. Clone Home lightly follows the very minuscule story set up in Going Mobile. In that first game, the duo is transported directly into a Secret Agent Clank vidcomic by a device called the Biomatter Converter. So you played a video game within a video game with the goal of stopping the Secret Agent Clank show/movie's fictional villain Maximilian from becoming sentient and breaking out of the video game, thereby becoming real within the Ratchet & Clank video game's fictional universe. In Clone Home, we begin the game playing as digitized copies of Ratchet & Clank, who were apparently cloned from the digital signature left behind at the end of Going Mobile. The clones are able to contact the real Ratchet & Clank and explain that the villain from Ratchet Deadlocked, Gleeman Vox, is responsible for cloning them and plans to utilize these clones to do his bidding or for ratings or something. I'm gonna level with you, maybe a shocker here. The story doesn't make a lot of sense. We kind of bounce back and forth between playing as the digital cloned Ratchet & Clank and playing as the real ones after they also get digitized and sent into Vox's computer partway through the game. Naturally, you have the exact same sprite regardless of which Ratchet you are in a level, unless I'm completely oblivious, which is very possible. I don't recall Vox fully explaining his evil plan here, but you can pretty safely guess if you've played Deadlocked that it's about money and therefore control. But this game that was made after Deadlocked came out didn't seem to get the memo that the Dread Zone death combat competition that Ratchet's trapped in for that game just straight up explodes at the end and no longer exists, with Vox choosing to get blown to pieces for ratings rather than let Ratchet save him. Here Vox is entirely fine, which you could say means this takes place in the middle of Deadlocked, but the very first line that digital Ratchet and Clank say to each other is that it's the Deadlocked off-season, which means that real Ratchet shouldn't be too busy to get their message and respond, apparently. What's more is that DigiClank suggests here that real Ratchet might be playing a quote-unquote deadlocked match, not that he's doing a Dread Zone challenge, which is what it's actually called, which probably means that this is just a weird no man's land where Java Ground wasn't aware of Deadlock's plot and just used the reference materials that they were given. That would be kind of noteworthy and maybe indicative of why the game was cancelled. See, we found out thanks to Going Mobile's designer Brad Wiggins finding my 2019 video while looking for his own promotional art he had made for Going Mobile, that the team at Handheld that made Going Mobile were supposedly more familiar with the Ratchet franchise than some of the Sony mobile producers tasked with overseeing the game, with Handheld itself internally insisting that it be faithful to the source material as fans, even if this was a questionably canon side adventure. It would be strange for the second game, then, to not have the same care paid to it. More on that later. Now, there's totally a chance that Vox fully explains his plan and I just legitimately blocked it out because I got gobsmacked several different times by some of the shit this game does. Several levels in a row, for example, take place in Vox's computer files as digital RNC try to brute force a lock protected by multiple passwords. The passwords are invariably based on the 4 or 5 photos that Vox has hundreds of copies of in his pictures folder. Photos that include Vox sticking his fucking tongue out for a selfie, Vox's mother, I shit you not, Mama Peaches holding a mustached baby Vox, and baby pictures of Gleeman Vox's brother, Daryl. Daryl Vox. This shit is insane. Later, after Vox transports real RNC into that PC, and they work with the digital RNC to kill digital RNC by destroying the module containing the clone data, Vox then sends himself into the PC as well, so that he can kill the real Ratchet and Clank and then clone their new digital signatures to do his bidding. Except at some point way earlier in the story, you just straight up see Vox in his little scorpion tank thing that he uses for the final boss fight, and digital RNC essentially say, yeah, you know what? I'm gonna pretend I didn't see that. At some point, Vox calls our heroes more pathetic than pirated shareware, which is an insane bar. Honestly, I'm sad this game was lost for so long solely because we could have had so many people getting into toxic Twitter arguments using this stupid Vox selfie as a profile pic. As for the game itself, it's, at least based on my first playthrough, a longer, better going mobile. Going mobile was short enough that you could feasibly beat it in like half an hour, where Clone Home took me closer to 2 hours my first time. Some of that was due to resets when I would clip through a wall and maybe get stuck, or if I got lost looking for the titanium bolt hidden in every level, and I probably lost 15 or so minutes trying to figure out how to beat the absolutely broken final boss too, but it also just felt meatier and more substantive. Going mobile and Clone Home both treat you to 7 weapons, which are functionally the same in both, but one has a different name. Or I guess kind of 2 have a different name. Over the course of the game, you'll obtain or buy the Lancer, Mini Nuke, and Mini Rocket from the console games and Going Mobile, as well as 2 returning weapons specifically from Going Mobile, the Defragmenter Shotgun and the Circuit Jammer, which fires homing shots that will track towards enemies in a circuit board sort of pattern, following 90-degree angles and straight lines. By beating the arena in Going Mobile, because yes, there is a full arena in each of these games, you would have obtained the Borzooka, a new entry in the Ratchet series' trademark coterie of morph guns. In Clone Home, though, the Borzooka is reskinned and renamed the Uzi, with enemies now being turned into female sheep instead of boars, i.e. ewes. It might be the best name this series has ever had for a gun, I'm not gonna lie. And by obtaining all of the titanium bolts in each game, you'll automatically unlock the Rhino. Noteworthy here is that there's only 1 titanium bolt per level at most in Clone Home, 13 total in the game's 14 levels, where Going Mobile had a fairly absurd 31 titanium bolts considering the size of that game. I'm not sure whether titanium bolts were simply pared back, or if this is sort of like the main games where they would have tossed more in at the very end before shipping the game, just based on the hidden spots that they found during gameplay and testing. In addition, you naturally have your trusty Omniwrench as well, along with Clank's helipack to let you glide, a Clank-mounted swing-shot grappling hook, grind rails, and Ratchet's ability to wall jump. These are all the same in both games as well, with the exception that in Clone Home's case, the wall jump was never fully finished probably, because you can just do some Mega Man X jumps off of one wall and pretty easily break many platforming challenges and entire levels this way. Now you might be wondering how this game would even work on an old brick phone. The answer is remarkably well, although with some natural drawbacks that lead to it feeling kinda stiff at times. Old phones, in case you're not old, had a 12-key number pad, and some had other soft keys as well that would act as your pause button here. You move horizontally with 4 and 6, with 5 being your weapon fire button right in the middle. 1 through 3 at the top are all jumps, with 1 and 3 acting as a jump while moving left or right respectively, and 2 is just straight up, and you can press these again to activate Clank's glide. 8 lets you do your wrench slam attack if you're in the air, the star button is your wrench attack itself, and the pound key opens the quick select menu for weapons. Now the benefit that both these games have nowadays is that emulation lets you play with your keyboard's number pad instead of a tiny phone number pad, which allows for a greater sense of control. Or like I did with Going Mobile years ago, you can even map the controls to a controller, which genuinely makes these games feel like you'd imagine a side-scroller Ratchet & Clank game would play like. From what I understand and what developers have told me, J2ME games broadly struggled with accepting multiple simultaneous key presses, which you would also not notice quite as much on an emulator. In other words, moving and shooting at the same time are not usually easy on the hardware itself. When I played Clone Home, I did use a number pad to get a bit more organic an experience this time, rather than lean on the ease provided by a controller. Though it's not like these games are really all that hard. If you die in Clone Home, you just respawn right at the start of the room you're in. It takes a bit of getting used to, but if you're a mouse and keyboard player, it'll be a pretty quick adjustment to your usual WASD controls, and sooner than you can say Zoopasnork, which is something that Ratchet says in this game, you'll be running and gunning at the same time, oblivious to the fact that doing both of those simultaneously would have been one of the more impressive feats of this hardware back then. You'll also quickly notice that due to the hardware's sound limitations, you're not getting any background music here. You'll just have to make do with the sonata of weapon blast sound effects and enemy explosions. Since you're almost certainly emulating this game if you do play it, I salute the souls that actually try to get this bad boy to load up on an actual 2005 phone, I do have one other emulation note. The speedrunners and folks that have been ironing out other details have a current recommendation of capping your emulator at 20 frames per second so that the game runs at what seems to be the correct speed based on how it ran in going mobile. Overall, it's not that easy to highlight this, so you'll have to trust me or experience it for yourself, but Clone Home simply feels smoother than going mobile. The platforming and character control feel far less stiff. The weapon balance is mostly better. I didn't mention yet that the weapons, by the way, do in fact have a level up in both games, just like in the main series, though you'll be hard-pressed to find an actual XP meter in the game, so they kind of just level up randomly based on use as far as you'll perceive it. But comparing Clone Home to going mobile, the weapon properties more noticeably change and improve once you hit the max level 3 in this game. Also note that the names themselves won't change when you max a gun out. There's no Heavy Lancer or anything like that, they just stop at level 3. I never felt that going mobile played particularly poorly, aside from the understandable struggles that come with having a fast-paced game that requires you to press a bunch of tiny buttons on an even tinier screen, but that was unavoidable for this kind of game at the time. But something about Clone Home just felt more refined and polished to play, even acknowledging the number of bugs that you will run into. Ratchet's wall jump is so janky that you'll pretty consistently clip into walls just for a second if you hit a very specific pixel while wall jumping. Enemies will launch themselves into walls and get stuck doing the same, or launch themselves into the abyss because they just want to die. There's nothing so far that'll do anything worse than force you to maybe reset and restart that particular level, but it's, as you would expect, ultimately an unfinished game. The only part that's egregious is the final boss fight against Vox, who is seemingly not tuned whatsoever to be able to be actually defeated in regular gameplay. I brought the Rhino to this fight because of course I did, and I couldn't even get within eyesight of him without him launching bombs right at me from just off screen, bombs that did full bars of damage. This final boss arena does have ample nanotech and ammo refills, but even when I clipped directly into him and shot him for minutes on end without him being able to hit me, it wouldn't kill him. If anything, it might have knocked him into his apparent second phase, where he would fire the same bombs but also fire some now vertically, and now they did almost all of your health in one shot. The safest way to take him down that I've found so far, and that others have seemed to find as well, is to just cheese it. Stand on the edge right where he'll get stuck on a crate or on the wall, and blast him with the shotgun until he explodes. I really want to see the first person who takes him down without cheesing it though, because the Rhino obliterates everything else but barely scratches Vox. Aside from him, there are only a few enemies in the game, similar to Going Mobile's 4 or so. There are turrets mounted on walls or ceilings, just like in Going Mobile. There are these robotic lizard-looking things. There's a guy that I'm just gonna say is officially named Big Shooty. I think I'm allowed to make that judgment call. And there are some exploding drones that'll barrel right at you when you're near them. Similar to the general gameplay feeling better here versus Going Mobile, the enemy AI feels slightly better as well. Although still what you might expect for a game on such simple hardware. The big shooties are the most notable to me in that sometimes right after they fire shots at you, naturally the moment they see you with no warning, so prepare to take damage the moment you walk left or right half the time, depending on the level terrain, after shooting they'll turn around and jump up the platform behind them and continue their standard patrol pattern. Other times, they, like the robo-lizards, will sometimes just launch themselves onto electrified floor panels and die. Same. Ultimately, Clone Home falls victim to the same sorts of quirks that make Going Mobile a game that I would only recommend to fans who want to see a weird little game and mess around for an hour or two. Namely, those quirks involve it being a 2D side-scroller on a vertically oriented screen, which means you don't have a lot of horizontal real estate to work with. Levels can end up labyrinthine at times, with you retreading a bit of the same ground trying to figure out where to go, though Clone Home does make stronger use of every gamer's favorite, big glowing arrows to help with that. I do feel that Clone Home might be a bit better at guiding you through the levels, with multiple avenues to get down to the next room or wherever you need to go, and it's really only a couple times that I felt like I've gotten a little lost. Usually those were related to finding the most hidden of titanium bolts, or near the end of the game where they'll ask you to hit a bolt crank to open one door on the other side of the room, then run all the way to that room to hit another bolt crank and repeat, but even those felt just a bit cleaner overall than Going Mobile. Certainly, that could be placebo, or just because the game wasn't 100% finished when it was at or nearly at gold state. Maybe they potentially just hadn't shoved a whole bunch more locked doors to hide titanium bolts behind. Hell, to that end, this game even has the same connectivity with Deadlocked that Going Mobile had, where after beating the game, you can submit your Deadlocked multiplayer profile name and unlock the same 2 multiplayer skins. It makes a bit more sense that that's here since this is more of a Deadlocked game than Going Mobile was, but it just as well could be something left over that never got removed. At the end of the day, it's all just impressive that something packed into a game that is smaller in file size than some of the PS2 Ratchet games' save files were can get so much of the series' juice right. The arena battles may be simple and reuse the same few level maps over and over again, but there's still a level of care that goes into having the same sorts of challenge modifiers that the main games did, like filling the room with toxic gas that lowers Ratchet's health over time, forcing you to take out every enemy before you pass out, or challenges that lock you to one specific weapon. Or just the fact that this game has a New Game Plus challenge mode. Not that anything's different here besides giving you more bolts and seemingly more experience for defeating enemies, but just that it's there at all, or that it has multiple save files really. Hell, for those of you that really want those hyper-capitalist undertones of the PS2 games to return, buying weapons in Clone Home doesn't give you full ammo off the jump. You then have to go right back into the vendor and buy half your ammo. That's what you want, right? As for why Clone Home was ultimately cancelled, it's still not exactly clear. The common explanation cited online was that the story beat of villain clones Ratchet for world domination or something was deemed too similar to 2007's Size Matters. But it turns out that was just some shit made up by a random wiki user when they were a kid. It didn't really ever make that much sense if you thought about it at all anyway, since the dialogue boxes could have just been marginally changed if that was somehow the issue. It's not like you ever fight Ratchet's clones in this game after all, they just fade out of existence once their job is done midway through the story. The worst you would have to do is maybe change the final boss out from being Vox, since he was already dead at this point, but that's really only if there was a concern about continuity, which there almost definitely wasn't. The cancellation also likely isn't an issue with perceived quality, because aside from being slightly unpolished in spots since, it was cancelled before being truly finished, aside from that, it's certainly a better game than Going Mobile, which, to reiterate, won awards. Plus, if Sony was unhappy with the quality of this game, it's then likely that Java Ground wouldn't have right afterwards been tasked with making an actual canon God of War game on phones too, which itself is often cited as one of the best J2ME games ever made. Based on comments by some of the former handheld games developers that worked on Going Mobile about not even being looped in on Clone Home whatsoever at any point, and suspecting that Sony may have violated some contract terms by giving handhelds code and proprietary software to Java Ground, based on that, my speculation, and it is just speculation, is that Handheld's upper brass may have caught wind of all this when Clone Home got announced. Since former employees like Going Mobile's designer specifically noted that Handheld's upper brass was, quote, very litigious, unquote, maybe the game got canned out of caution, either because Sony allegedly did go under the table and cross a line, or just simply because once Sony got an angry email or legal threat, the company felt there was no way to deal with releasing Clone Home in a way that wouldn't end up with them ultimately losing money by having to quickly settle a case out of court, and it just no longer made financial sense to release. Maybe like last time, this video will refresh the memories of some of the folks that were involved with this game's production. For now, the most interesting nugget we have left is that ever so briefly there was supposedly a pitch and plan during or after Clone Home's production for Java Ground to afterwards make a Jak and Daxter J2ME game. Now that one definitely doesn't exist. It supposedly never even left paper, but it does make you wonder what could have been. That said, we've one more time got to give flowers to the folks who spent years trying to find Clone Home so that we no longer have to wonder what could have been or what actually was with this game. So give a thanks to the entire community involved in the search, and particularly Emily and SGOC. I'm proud to have played a minor role in this bit of Ratchet history, and most of all, I'm proud to have officially named Big Shooty. That's definitely canon, but without these two especially, this would have potentially been years away from happening, if ever. So hats off to you, we salute you. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay golden.